Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Lisa Meltzer in this segment. She's a sleep psychologist at National Jewish Health. She's joining us to discuss the issue of sleep debt. Now, after a local school district moved high school and middle school start times to a later time, experts were able to evaluate the impacts this had on parents and kids' sleep-wake patterns over a 3-year period. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Meltzer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do understand that typically your research is focused on students. What prompted you to switch the focus on parents? Or was that something that just happened based on participation?
So our approach to evaluating the impact of changing school start times was to take a look at all of the aspects of life that gets changed, because students don't live in a vacuum, right? They live in a very complex socio-ecological system that includes parents and teachers and then the community as well. And so we did look at the student impact, but for the first time we thought it was important to see what changes these different school start times might have on parents and family functioning.
How was the study conducted?
So this was a survey study done over 3 years. So in the spring prior to the school start time changes, and then in the spring 1 year and 2 years out, we were able to send surveys out to parents electronically and ask them a whole bunch of questions about their sleep and daytime functioning. We had quite a lot of parents who filled out our surveys every year. We had thousands of parents who filled out our surveys every year and provided us with that information, looking at parents of students in elementary, middle, and high school.
What about any of the student responses?
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to talk about student responses?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So, yes, we also surveyed students. Students were surveyed during the school day to increase our ability to capture a representative population. And, again, we had thousands of students, somewhere in the range of about 60 to 70% of our student body in elementary, middle, and high school filled out surveys at the same 3 time points, looking at their sleep and daytime functioning as well.
How different were the responses among parents and students who were at different levels, middle school, high school? Were there major shifts in some of the responses as far as sleep and habits during the day?
We definitely saw big changes for the students, especially in terms of their sleep. So our high schools moved their start time 70 minutes later, from 7:10 a.m. to 8:20, and our middle schools moved the start times about 50 minutes later, from 8 a.m. to 8:50. And what we saw was that with a later start time, students did not go to bed any later, but they did sleep later in the morning, and that later sleep increased their sleep duration. And so on average, middle school students were sleeping an extra 30 minutes per day, and high school students were sleeping an extra 45 minutes per day. And while that may not sound like a whole lot, when you add that up over the course of the week, for middle school students, you're looking at extra 2.5 hours, and for high school students, almost 4 extra hours of sleep per week, which over the course of the school year is somewhere around 140 extra hours of sleep. What was really noticeable about this change, though, was the percent of our students who were getting sufficient amount of sleep more than doubled for our high school students and increased by 50% for our middle school students. And this is notable because at the same time, the national average for the percent of students getting sufficient sleep actually went down. And so it wasn't just a trend of what's going on in the U.S. The changes in the number of students getting enough sleep was a direct result of having later school start times. When we looked at the parents, we found similar results in terms of the impact on especially middle school and high school parents. So families where there was at least one student in middle school or high school did not change their bedtimes, but did change their wake times. So in particular for families with high school students, they were now waking 23 to 25 minutes later and getting an extra 20 minutes of sleep per night. So again, over the course of the week, that's an hour and 40 minutes, and that adds up over the course of the school year. We also saw an increase in the percent of parents who are now getting sufficient amount of sleep at night, and parents reported significant improvements in their sleep quality, and fewer parents reported feeling tired. So overall, we saw great benefits for students and parents of middle school and high school students.
Were there any responses having to do with the interactions between parents and their children who are now, everybody's now getting a little bit of extra sleep? Were there any responses that indicated positive results in that aspect?
Definitely. So in addition to our surveys, we conducted focus groups with both parents and students. And so this gave us a chance to ask questions about what you're talking about, those interactions and that day-to-day experience. Parents reported a number of positive outcomes, in particular, not only their child getting more sleep, but their child being more wakeful. It was easier to wake them in the morning. They were more pleasant. A lot of parents used the word zombies prior to the start time change, but they said now their kids were, quote-unquote, human when they woke up in the morning with the later start time. So we saw a lot of improvements with teen mood and with energy, and the students reported that as well. We also saw an increased amount of time in the morning that students were able to eat breakfast. And so all around, we found a number of significant positive outcomes for the families.
Have these results affected any of the school districts in surrounding areas as far as pushing their start times based on the results of your research?
I don't know that it's a direct result of my research, but I do know that the movement for changing school start times has grown across the country. And in Colorado, after this school district, the Cherry Creek School District, changed their start times and showed that this was a feasible, successful thing to do, a number of districts in our other districts in our area, both in the Denver metro area, Colorado Springs, and up into Fort Collins and Boulder, a number of school districts changed their middle and high school start times. Across the country, again, other districts as well, and in the state of California, it is now law, starting next school year, that middle schools can start no earlier than 8 a.m. and high schools can start no earlier than 8:30 a.m.
So what would you say are the next steps for this research? Where do you plan to go from here?
I think that one of the unique features of our research was that we also looked at parents and students in elementary school, because one of the factors when you're changing school start times, when you make middle schools and high schools start later, somebody has to start earlier. And so elementary schools moved their start times in our district from 9 a.m. to 8 a.m. And so we did look at sleep in both students and parents. And what we found was that both students and parents adjusted their bedtimes and their wake times earlier so that there were no significant changes in the amount of sleep that either elementary school students or their parents were getting with an earlier start time. So really supports this so-called flip that they do. But we do need more research on the impact of changing middle school and high school start times on elementary schools. In particular, how early is too early for elementary school students to start? So again, in our district, they started at 8 a.m. But now I'm hearing districts that want to move elementary school students to 7:30, which personally, I think it's just too early. So trying to find that balance between improving sleep and quality of life for middle and high school students without any unintended consequences for our elementary school students.
Where can our listeners learn some more?
So there's a number of great resources out there. In particular, Start School Later is an organization, a nonprofit organization that, again, has been working for years and years on legislation and getting the word out there. Their website has a ton of resources about how to, talk to your school district about changing start times, and it has a collection of all the research that's been done. So I think that's one of the best resources out there.
Great. Well, Dr. Meltzer, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for bringing attention to the topic.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Lisa Meltzer. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.